Okay, welcome to the final Scrutiny Programme Committee of this current council term. Just a personal note, thank you all for your support and help over the last few years while I've been chairing it. Can we start with apologies for absence? I've got apologies from Councillor Jeff Jones and Cyril Anderson. Was there anybody else, Bridge? I can't think of anybody else.
I'm not aware of any other apologies, Chair.
No, okay. This is, I don't know if David is here actually, David Anderson Thomas's final committee is Statutory Education Co-optee. And I'm not sure if Alexander's going to be standing for another term or not. Alexander, are you going to be coming back to us?
Hi all, yeah, if I can.
Okay, well, I'd certainly like to thank David for everything he's done on the committee and yourself as well, Alexander, as well. I'm sure we'll have you back, but thank you for your participation in scrutiny and contribution to scrutiny as well. Right, okay, item 2 is disclosures of personal and prejudicial interest. Has anybody got anything they want to declare? No. Item 3, prohibition of whip votes in declaration of party whips. Sorry, Clive. Yes, hi, Clive.
Yeah, I'm going to declare personal and prejudicial interest in item 6, complaints annual report 2020-21. Refers to adult social care, at which time I was the cabinet member, so I shall leave the meeting at that point.
Okay, thank you, Clive. Lovely. They'll send you a form to fill in as well, most probably. Okay, minutes of the last meeting from the 15th of February, which is our crime and disorder scrutiny. So for accuracy, on page 1, page 2, page 3, page 4, page 5, and page 6. Are we content those are accurate? I will take your silence as consent unless someone speaks up now. Lovely, thank you very much. Item 5 is public question time. We haven't had any questions received from the public at all, so we're going to move straight on to item 6, which is the complaints annual report. And we have Sarah Lackenby, the head of digital and customer services, with her. Dave Howes, the director of social services. Councillor Elliot King, who tells me his video is not working, but welcome anyway, Elliot. And also, I think Mark Child is with us as well, isn't he? Yes, the cabinet member for adult social care and community health services. So who's going to introduce this report? Sarah, will you be doing it or will the cabinet members be doing it?
Chair, I'm going to leave now.
Okay, Clive, thank you. You're coming back? Okay, Clive is gone.
We'll make sure, Chair, to call him back in case he is.
In case he wants to come back, yeah.
Yeah.
Right, who's going to be presenting this report? Elliot, Mark, or Sarah?
Yes, I'll start by presenting the report. Thank you, Chair. And I wanted to also say thank you very much to the panel as well for taking this report. I know this isn't the usual report you'd hear at this particular programme committee, so thank you. So just to briefly take you through the key points of the report. So as you all know, 2020-21, very challenging years because of the pandemic. So any comparison with previous years really should be taken within that context because we were in the middle of difficult circumstances, and you'll see that reflected. It's also a slightly changed report because in previous years, this was before we got the Local Government Elections Wales Act 2021, and complaints is mentioned there. So obviously now we also take a report to the Governance and Audit Committee, and we took the first one before Christmas to that committee. You'll see in the report as well, despite all the disruption due to COVID, but both the Council and the Ombudsman, we did make some good progress on advancing changes and new initiatives. So we did review and update all of the policies. The complaints team also did receive training from the Ombudsman. Despite the pandemic, they were able to do that virtually, which was very helpful. We started developing the new IT system as well to make the process easier for both the public and more efficient for staff. And you'll see in the appendix as well the attached Ombudsman's annual letter as well, which highlights some of the key projects which the Ombudsman has also undertaken, which included, they are now starting to publish more data online on their own website. And just picking up on the one of the points that you as a programme committee might have you raised yesterday. So all the actions in the Ombudsman's letter have been completed as well. So just going back to the complaints policies, we did review all those because of the Ombudsman's requirements in the new Act, the Ombudsman Act. So it's all up to date. It also includes how we'll handle Welsh language complaints in line with Welsh language legislation. We work very closely with the Ombudsman's office, myself and the complaints team. We submit quarterly returns, and we also attend a lot of their progress update meetings. And you'll see, you know, a lot of the information in the Ombudsman's letter as well is related to the information that we send them throughout the year. The report highlights stage 1, stage 2 complaints, also highlights comments and compliments, both corporate and social services. But just to reiterate the impacts of the pandemic that's had on the numbers. And we do use comments and complaints, we do use complaints as well, but comments, complaints, compliments, particularly to learn so that how we can develop services and make services fit for the future wherever possible. So just some very key high level points. So you'll see corporately stage 1, stage 2 complaints, comments reduced for 2020 and 21. But requests for service increase. Now that's understandable, I think, given where we were with COVID at that time. And then you'll see that obviously there's then all the stats and data around adult services and child and family as well. So you'll see stage 1 for adult services did decrease. The stage 2 increased slightly. You'll see as well for child and family, we saw a slight increase in stage 1, but stage 2 remained the same. We also, you'll find throughout the reports as well in the appendices, we talk about the Ombudsman cases as well, and which of those were upheld and which didn't continue. You'll also find that in terms of social services for child and family, we've got an increase in some because there was multiple complaints about a single case, so that's got to be taken within that context as well. And I think increasingly complaints are becoming very complicated. Sometimes they'll involve multiple agencies as well. They are becoming quite complex across the whole organisation. So we're finding with the new IT system now, some of the complaints processes will also be automated. So that's going to make it a lot easier, both for staff out in services, but also the complaints team. And that's being developed in-house by the digital services team. And we're hoping to get that live in the first quarter. So we've already completed the system. It's just now a matter of training and getting people confident using it. So overall, there are no trends of concern within the report compared to previous years. And I'd also ask the programme committee just to note the good work undertaken by all the staff, but particularly the complaints team, during what was a very challenging year for everyone. So thank you very much. Happy to take some questions.
Yeah, thank you, Sarah. And certainly, I think we will note, obviously, the work of the staff, all the staff have been working very hard during this very difficult period of time. Just quick query on the complexity of the complaints. Is there a particular reason why they're getting more complex? Is that mostly social services, or is that other areas as well?
I think it's across the board, to be honest, and I think it's just the nature of services and people's needs, I think, as well. But you know, I think we need to sort of keep that in mind as we move forward. I mean, invariably, we are involving lots of different people in trying to answer the complaints as well. And we're working a lot with the Ombudsman, and they've been very, very helpful in how they support us. So.
Is that because people are struggling to cope with the systems which we have in place? Or I mean, because most of the complaints are not upheld, are they? You know, are people struggling with our systems? Has the fact that a lot of the time people haven't been able to get hold of the council on the telephone because of the pandemic, has that been added to the complexity?
I don't think it's necessarily been the systems. No, I think it's the nature of the complaints themselves.
Yeah.
and people's individual circumstances. I don't think it's necessarily been the systems, no.
Okay, and just one more question if I bring Chris Holly in terms of social services. I mean, and Dave House is here. I know obviously the whole period of the pandemic, we were on social services under huge amounts of strain, not just about dealing with the issues of the pandemic, but also staff being off, etc. How is that actually reflected in the complaint system and the complaints itself? Because they seem to have gone down. Is that because we're doing things? I'm not quite sure why that's happened. That didn't seem to work to make any sense that it's gone down like that. Maybe Dave could come in and talk us through that. Dave?
Yeah, no, it's tricky, Chair. I suppose my starting point is I don't think we should see any reduction in the number of complaints as something, you know, as a sign of progress, particularly not during this period. It's difficult to absolutely understand how that's happened, but the reality is our service offer was very different, and I think the population understood that our service offer was very different. The reality is we would have, I don't know, I'll pick an obvious example. Whilst, you know, in a normal year, if you were waiting, you know, an excessive period of time for domiciliary care, chances are you would have been escalating, you know, complaints or concerns or lots of contact. Whereas I suspect people's expectations and understanding of the reality of circumstances change, and that may well have had an impact. But I'm hypothesizing. I couldn't really work it out to absolutely say that. You know, the number of people that we were able to support was different, and certainly for a period of time was fewer, and that, you know, may well have had, you know, an impact as well on overall numbers. But the offer was so different for many individuals as well. So I think all of those factors have probably played out, and we will, as part of our recovery, we'll need to, you know, recovery of services, recovery of our offer, recovery of the health and care system. The information that we do have, that, you know, particularly from complaints that were upheld, whether partially or fully justified, that information does need to play into the recovery of our services, making sure we're learning those lessons. It does form part of our overall quality assurance approach. But I think, as Sarah said right back at the beginning, making any direct comparisons from one year to the next, very difficult in this period. It's probably better to dive into, and that's certainly the approach that we've taken in the service, of dive into the specifics of justified or partially justified complaints, both immediately to try and think about what we could do to mitigate some of those, you know, the things that weren't working as well as people rightly should have expected, even in very difficult circumstances, to see whether we could make any immediate changes in the emergency, limited sometimes to what we could do, but nevertheless we needed to pay attention to it. But probably more importantly, it's looking forward and thinking about, as we try and recover systems, the overall infrastructure, catch up on backlogs, paying attention to the things that haven't worked well, that need to be part of our recovery. And I look to some of the obvious things where we've got complaints being upheld. It's relatively small numbers, but nevertheless, you know, each time that happens, that's something that we clearly could have done better. But when it's areas like communication and those sorts of things, well, even as we recover, we'll be moving into a different world, more hybrid working, different forms of communication are really important. So if some of those things aren't working for our population, we really need to attend to those kind of factors, just to make sure that we're constantly striving to be the best that we can be. But that's probably the best I can say, Chair. I certainly don't see drops in numbers of complaints as something for us to see as, oh, well, that's good, that's sign of progress. I probably am always looking for a good system that encourages people to assert their rights and part of that is raising concerns when they're not happy. Obviously, what I don't want to see is, increasing numbers of justified complaints, but people asserting their rights is a really positive and important thing, particularly, it's for the whole of the council, but particularly so for social care and social care services.
Okay, are we starting to get back on an even keel now, David, as the pandemic starts to recede into the background? I know cases are still rising a bit, but in terms of seriousness,
I suppose we're firmly in recovery mode,
right?
But that recovery is going to take several months. So some of the key things are we have still got significant backlogs to catch up. We've still got significant waiting lists for really important services like domiciliary care. We've got more, in the absence of having sufficient domiciliary care, we've got more people in care home beds that actually we should have been able to support them at home. So we've got some really significant challenges to still overcome. But it's not just that we are managing an emergency day to day. It's more about the focus of how do we recover the system now. But it will take us several months at best. And you're right, we're seeing an uptick in community transmission. So we might have some further challenges along the way as well.
Okay, Mark Childs wants to come in first, and I'll bring Sarah back after that. Mark.
Yeah, thanks. I think Dave touched on a lot of it. Clearly, there has been a drop for that year, but that drop cannot be considered to be part of any trend or any indicator of where we're going to be in future either. I think people did become, for a period, people, families, communities did up their level of resilience. Certainly initially during the first wave of COVID, and maybe that had an effect on the amount of complaints that came in, or maybe it has, in the worst case, just built up a backlog of complaints to come in.
I hope not.
I hope not, but we are yet to see the full results of COVID, both as complaints and in every other aspect, I think. And as Dave said, we are coming out of it, but I think some of it we have lessons to learn from the way we dealt with and the public dealt with COVID, certainly as far as social services go, and some of that will be in the level of complaints, what they were about, and perhaps the increased complexity that we're seeing as well. So I think the staff did fantastically, and I always say that over during the COVID period, and I think the public did fantastically well, particularly those that have a general reliance on the services that we provide. But as Dave said, dom care is still an issue, and that's affecting pressures from people leaving hospital and that sort of thing. And during the budget, we made an effort to up the terms and conditions of care workers to try and make retain and recruit staff, and so the list may well generate more complaints. We don't know yet. But I've just finished on saying, like I said before, there's lots to learn, but I think our staff did great.
Okay, thanks, Mark. Sarah?
Thanks, Chair. Just to add as well, in terms of compliments, because we did actually see both for adult services and children's services an increase in compliments for that year. And I think that is the unusual reflection as well around COVID, just the amount of support that people were giving, and we were getting formal feedback and positive feedback around social services teams as a result of that as well. Thanks.
Yeah, of course. Definitely worth noting that. Absolutely. Chris Holly.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask a question about these complaints and the complexity and what have you? In another place, what I'm finding is that people are very quick to run to the free-to-use legal type insurance that some solicitors and some companies are offering, that they take on issues and where one of the best ones is to take the council on because no win, no fee, that type of thing. Are we finding that we're getting a lot more that happening to right across the complaints procedure, not just in social services, where I know it can happen, but I know it happens in housing, and I know it's happened in other parts of the council. So are we seeing an increase in that?
Sarah, maybe Debbie, I don't know.
I'm not seeing that through the complaints team, Councillor Holly, but I can take that question away and ask the question.
Okay.
I wonder if you could, because one of the things that I've noticed is that in some parts of the council and some of the people that I've spoken to, they're saying that, oh, we'll take it to law if we can't get our way. So I'm wondering if that is happening, and I would appreciate an answer. Thank you very much, Sarah.
Yeah. I think there's a bit of a minefield as well in no win no fee, because there's all sorts of loopholes involved in actually pursuing that course as well, which many people aren't aware of. Dave, do you want to comment on this?
Yeah, I think as Chris has already acknowledged, I mean, I suppose the nature of some of the social services work that we're involved in, particularly where we're intervening in, family life on a statutory basis, there's clearly a lot of legal challenge, and some of that does spill over. You probably noticed it on the appendices. Some of the reasons that complaints aren't pursued under the council's, whether it's the social services or the corporate complaints policy, it references matter in court, or it's being dealt with under a child protection process, etc. And there are often, quite appropriately so, legal advice in place for those individuals. And again, we would encourage that. If there was a family, an individual who weren't appropriately accessing legal support, we'd actually be pushing, no, it's really important, given the nature of the matters that we're dealing with, that you do have that robust independent advice. There probably is a little bit of what you're describing as well, Chris, of I suppose we could describe it as ambulance chasing in some areas of our business, but generally there's a good reason at the heart of that, though I don't necessarily appreciate, as I'm sure all of us have some reservations about that ambulance chasing type approach, but there's usually a significant issue at the heart of that around people's human rights, etc. And certainly, I'd tolerate a bit of that if what that meant was people's rights were being properly respected and we were being held to account, etc. Appropriately so. But as Sarah says, I don't know whether that's similar across the rest of the council. She can obviously explore that a bit further.
Okay, thanks for that. Just one more question. I was looking at the tables. One of the upheld complaints, and I don't want to obviously go into details of individual complaints. One of the upheld complaints is against CAP, which I assume is the common access point, which is, of course, quite an important part of the whole social services offer. Did that particular upheld complaint relate to any particular flaws in the way we operate the common access point, or is it sort of a one-off type thing, without going into any specific details, Dave?
Yeah, not a systemic failing, Peter, right, which would be the biggest worry for us. But clearly, both of our front doors deal with hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of contacts. It would be surprising if occasionally there wasn't something that we did where, in hindsight, in reflection, we obviously strive, not for that to be the case, but it was an individual thing rather than a systemic flaw in our approach.
Because there's always a danger of someone coming to the common access point and saying such and such is happening, and it maybe gets put to one side and something tragic happens as a result of that, and that's the systemic thing we need to avoid, isn't it?
Absolutely, and that it would be one of the areas that we'd be most vigilant about, for the reasons that you've described.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks. Has anybody got any other questions on this complaint report at all? No. Okay. Can I thank you all for coming along, and Sarah, David, Mark, and Elliot for coming along and presenting the report. And no doubt we'll drop you a letter in due course, but don't expect anything. We need any answers on that, just the information. But thank you very much indeed for coming along. Trace, thank you. Okay, next item is going to be the item 7, which is the Procurement Scrutiny Inquiry Final Report, which is an inquiry panel set up to have an in-depth look at council procurement. Chris Holly convened that panel, and over the next 9 months, we've been gathering a range of evidence, and now this is the final report. And obviously, we're being asked to submit this inquiry report to Cabinet. It will go to Cabinet after the council elections, but if we agree it today. Chris, do you want to present this report?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Can I first start by saying thank you to everyone that was involved in this, because apart from the councillors, we had a great deal of support from our partners outside of the council, and also from council employees as well. Not an easy subject to actually inquire about and to find conclusions and actually do some investigation. But one of the things we found about it was that there was an understanding that procurement isn't just about buying something off the shelf. It's about getting what you need and getting the quantity you need and the quality you need. And I think there's in the conclusions, there's a list of conclusions and recommendations. But what I would like to do is just to explain a bit about the process that we've done. What we did was we invited some of our partners from people that we hire vehicles off, from people that we take taxis, from people that supply us with materials for our building services, etc. And we had quite an open brief discussion with them, and that discussion was, I think, and members will agree with me, it was quite informative. And actually, I think some of the answers we had were quite surprising about how our procurement system was very helpful for many of them. I think one of the things that we did learn about this system was that whereas before we used to have a register of people that we would pull off, some of that has changed, especially in IT, which shocked us a little bit, because we were under the assumption that we just had a list of people that we went to and got materials from. But in IT, because of the complexity of it, we may have to go to individuals, and we have to have some sort of arrangements with them. And also the fact that the way in which leasing has actually taken a major part in the current procurement system. The members themselves, I have to say, I took a great deal of interest in it and helped a great deal in the inquiry, and I thank them as well. The conclusions are all there. There's 9 of them, and also there's some recommendations. And I noticed, I thank you very much for the questions I had, and I'll go through the questions now and then answer some questions, if that's all right.
Yeah,
Jeff?
Yep.
Okay, one of the questions I had sent to me was recommendation, schools guide for procurement is finalised. Assist schools to understand procurement rules and regulations, best practice. I'm pretty sure that when we present this, or whoever presents it to Cabinet after the election, I'm pretty sure that whoever is in the Cabinet at the time would recognise that this is a good way forward, that we have a across-the-board understanding of what procurement is and how that we can help the schools. There was also none about education programs, representations in schools. This actually is marked as a quick win. The reason for this is that we've asked Mr. Chris Williams, who's head of procurement in the Council of Commercial Services, that he sets up something with staff of the schools, which they have, and it's a group called the Premises Managers Meeting, that then has an input, comes and meets with a group of councillors to give us an input on what's happening. So I think that's an issue that we're dealing with, and is a quick win. I think the interesting one that we asked about, or somebody asked about, and which I will answer now, is about the cost of council's building services, and how expensive it was compared to if we go to external contractors. Well, I have to say this is one that is written in folklore more than in reality. We have had a few instances, and where one thing we have to make absolutely sure of is when we procure something to be done in a school, not only is it done correctly, not only is it done in a safe and proper way, but also the materials we use are the materials that we would expect to be used in a public building, and especially around vulnerable children. There's many, I think there's quite a few issues around what has happened in schools, especially, but we've also happened in social services in some of our residential homes. The one item the one example I will always give, and this is not recently, this is a few years ago, when a school had some broken windows in a door. Instead of going to the building services to get it repaired, they had a local glazier in. He repaired them for a third of the price. Unfortunately, he didn't use the glass that was recommended. After a couple of days, with the children moving the door back and forth, the glass smashed and came down on the floor. That is a major issue for that school, and an issue that we should all remember. We're all governors of schools, and that is something we should look at and be very mindful of in the future. So when we say that as an organisation, do we procure? Is our procurement perfect? Obviously not. There is nothing perfect, and we can improve in certain fields, and that's why we've put together these recommendations for changes. But also, I think we need to understand, and that's why we've said that we should set up this working group for people to understand why what we are procuring and why we are procuring it. Thank you, Chair. I will try and answer as many questions as I can possibly can. Okay,
thank you. I think what you're saying on the schools is it should be making sure we're doing like-for-like comparisons with what the DLO is offering. Yeah, I'm sure there's some school governors wanting to come in on that. One thing I will say about this report is it does show that scrutiny is not just about asking questions, but is also about influencing policy as well. And you can't separate scrutiny from policy, but that's my own bugbear anyway. Alexander, you want to come in first?
Thank you, Chair. And thanks very much, Chris, for putting this together and working so diligently towards trying to get some clarity and transparency around the procurement process. As you say, we're all, well, quite a lot of us are school governors, and this is a subject so close to our heart. I'm not sure I'd quite go along with the urban myth or however you characterised it, that the perception at the school governor end is that council services are more expensive. And there's also the issue of the landlord's consent document, the most impenetrable of which we'll all be familiar with, and no one really wants to have a look at that document. It almost appears, and whether that's correct or not, that it's put there as a block to us finding out the procurement process and value for money. So it is very opaque. And as primary schools representative, I really welcome the idea of putting together that working group so that my head and all the other heads and the governors as well can actually see what's going on. No one wants the scenario like you've just put forward, where there's any suggestion of unsafe practices. But we as schools have a duty to our pupils to provide the very best education that we can as well. And when we're weighing up building and education costs, then that's a hard place to be in, and no one wants to be there. So really welcome that, and thanks, Chris.
Not a problem, and we. To be perfectly honest, we didn't deal with the landlord consent forms because that's an issue which I think we need to take up with legal at some time in the future, because there is an element around that about how we also do stock transfer of property and what have you. So I think you're very right to bring it up. And I think it's a question we need to look at. And I understand that, head teachers have got a concern and governors have got a concern when they see a price which seems to be much higher, and in many cases it is. There's no doubt about that. But I think understanding the rationale behind it is the way forward.
Maybe perhaps the direct labour people need to actually be better on their communications and explaining why their prices are higher. Mike Wise.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, as I say, I was actually on that panel, and it was very, very interesting, and a lot of investigation went on, not just around the schools, but really I felt concerned regarding procurement within schools, because it was the main issue that had been brought up within the Ordnance and Governance Committee, that this was the main area, and it seemed to be that when we sort of did interview heads or chairs of governors, because the report to come forward, it was the knowing and understanding what the rules were, and I felt it was paramount that we could offer and show support for that. And I think that's what was important, where the chair actually invited Mr. Brian Rolls from Education along, so we could do some sort of digging with them as well, and to get the partnership working, that we could offer advice and perhaps put sort of information in place that would support schools, because as I say, the governors, we all got responsibilities, but as I say, I think the chair as well have obviously said not only within education that we sort of flagged up where we could give support and show further guidance of the council, but also where perhaps in supporting small and medium businesses as well, and how we can offer opportunities out there for contracts as well. Thanks, Chair.
Okay. Peter Jones.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I too was a member of the group that looked into this whole issue, and I'd like to thank Chris. Incidentally, I thought he chaired it in a very thorough and balanced manner, and I think the working group worked extremely well together. I would like to make a comment. I mean, the comment is that this is actually quite a radical report. And I would stress that it is a radical report in terms of procurement practice and policy. And why do I say that? I think in particular because it's tried to look beyond what you might call the conventional boundaries for thinking about procurement, and to look more widely, particularly within the context of the Council's new responsibilities and commitments in relation to climate change and the nature crisis and so forth, and therefore draw attention in particular under long-term challenges to numbers 2 and 3, relating respectively to the issue of carbon footprint in relation to particular contractual arrangements with outside providers of services or goods or whatever, and number 3, looking at, where relevant, to stress where relevant and appropriate, looking for nature-based solutions above alternative kinds of solution. I think that this is important, that we recognise this as a council. We are now in an era of climate emergency, of nature emergency, and therefore our procurement practices should follow our commitments in those areas. And I think that the panel were united in taking the view that these are relevant concerns and considerations, and hence their inclusion in the long-term challenges. I hope long-term, incidentally, doesn't take too long. We'll all recall the famous remark that in the long term we're all dead. And I hope that these commitments will happen sooner rather than later. But I thought it was an excellent working group, an excellent report. Thank you to Chris and the other members. And I say it is a radical document that deserves careful consideration by Cabinet. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter.
Can I come back to there, because there's something Peter has just brought up which is incredibly important. It's the increase in nature-based solutions, because this is one thing that could save the council a considerable amount of money in the long term. And there are issues around what we plant, what we don't plant, and what we use. And the other thing is, the one thing that I know, it's about the local pound and how we involve local companies and have look at contracts to see if we can make them a little bit smaller, to get more people involved, to get a wider spread throughout the city and around the region. And that is the one issue that we can do that can immediately cut down on the carbon footprint. And I thank Peter for his input into that, because it did make a big difference to the members who were on the panel.
Okay.
Thank you.
Terry?
Yeah, sorry I was late. I had trouble getting in, but also to say that woman phoned me yesterday that you give my number to Pete. That's all it was.
Okay, right. Do you want to comment on this report, Terry? No?
No, thank you.
Okay, right. Lyndon. Is Lyndon here?
Yeah, yes, he is. Thanks, Chair. Certainly, I was a member of the panel. It was really interesting. I certainly learned a lot, and well done to Chris as well, because he chaired the inquiry well. And I say, I thought it was really important because, you know, it's really important that local businesses have the opportunity to bid for work and you know, locally, and bid for work and services, because their employees and those businesses spend that money locally, and that creates local jobs. So really important. That was an important part, and it was very interesting to speak to some of those businesses as well.
Okay. Anybody else got anything to comment on this now? Chris, you need to sum up, or are you happy just to?
In summing up, again, I want to thank everybody for their input into this, and especially the local businesses. And can I also thank our scrutiny officers for the research that they've done, first of all, because we did look into a couple of other authorities in England and in Wales where they had this local pound that they were using as a model for procurement. In some cases, it is workable. In other cases, I have to say, I think it was more of a drawback for many local councils, local jobs, because whereas in one of the ones we looked at, the travel to work area in, I think it was Wigan, is about 12 million. So they had a far better homebred workforce than we would have. So, you know, it was that part of it was interesting to read about, and also to discover what we can and cannot do, because when we have large projects, many of the times we see companies coming down here from the Midlands or whatever, and they're coming down because we haven't got the local skills. So that became a major part of this inquiry. But again, I'd like to thank everybody for taking part in it. And I think that when the cabinet see it, wherever they are in the new cabinet, I think they will appreciate it, and I think they will follow some of the conclusions and some of the guidelines that we put in and the wins. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I certainly would extend my thanks as well to members of the panel, and just say that I hope that as we come back to some sort of normality in the next council, we can hopefully we'll have more of these inquiry panels which can look in depth at issues and maybe start to influence policy as a result of that. Bridge, do you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, just before you conclude, aside from recommendations to Cabinet, I think you will note within the report that the panel's actually asked the committee also to consider how procurement fits into the overall scrutiny work programme. So all I wanted to say was that this inquiry obviously is still live in terms of its Cabinet decision and follow-up process. So it's going to be in the work programme for the next year or so anyway. Perhaps after that, the committee or perhaps one of the performance panels, for example, Service Improvement Finance, could pick up any future issues relating to the procurement process and performance, you know, perhaps annually. So I just wanted to address that which is obviously clearly expressed.
I think on that, Bridge, we thought it would be wiser to let the next council and the next scrutiny programme committee look at this, because it covers such a wide, well, it virtually covers the whole council. So as such, whether you know, I know that audit would like to have a look at it. I know performance scrutiny would like to have finance and performance, but at the same time, I think education need to be part of it as well, and social services, because the procurement of domiciliary care for residential care and for for out of county or out of county placement as well. So because it's such a wide project and such a massive procurement, we spend hundreds of millions of pounds. We thought it might be better to leave the incoming cabinet and the incoming scrutiny board look at it, and may decide to set up a scrutiny board to look at procurement on its own.
Yeah, either way, once it goes to cabinet, they will obviously consider the recommendations and they'll respond to those recommendations. And at some point in the future, maybe 12 months after that, we want to examine how they've responded to those recommendations to make sure that they've done what they said they're going to do. So yeah, but as Chris said, it is a big subject and one which you want to keep an eye on as well. So thank you again, Chris, and thank you for all the members of the panel. And can we agree that this report is forwarded to cabinet? And we agreed the report? Yep. Great, thank you very much. Okay, item 8 is the Scrutiny Dispatches Impact Report, which is there for, I think, information or acceptance. Are people happy to accept that report and to push on to council? Yep. Okay. And then after that, we have the scrutiny letters. There are a couple of letters reported for information. And then the item 9 then is the annual scrutiny work programme review. I want to spend a few minutes just looking at this because I think it's important that we look at ourselves and how we've been working, and make so that any lessons or any views we have as to how the committee's been working might be carried forward into the next council. So in particular, I'm interested in your views on have things worked well over the past year? Have we focused on the right things? What could we do better? And what have we learned that can help us improve and develop future scrutiny? So has anybody got any views they want to share with us on those particular issues at all? Don't be shy.
Sure.
Chris?
I think there's a lot of things we need to look at, and I think one of the things we need to look at is what the structure of scrutiny is currently, and the way in which it's split up in children's services, adult services, performance, education, and environment, and many other things. But I think one of the things we need to understand is that the Scrutiny Programme Committee is the overarching committee that comes to look at it. But I think the time has come that when we have the next Scrutiny Programme Committee, we understand what the priorities of the council are, what the priorities of the cabinet are, and the scrutiny. And I take Councillor Black's point about the policies. We should seriously think about how those scrutiny functions fit into what the cabinet portfolios are, because we currently haven't got enough scrutiny functions to follow the cabinet as such. There's 10, maybe 12 members in the cabinet, and really when we have a scrutiny function that should be following the cabinet, and because we have a very limited number of scrutiny, I think that is something that the future council needs to look at. And I think we've worked extremely hard, the people who are on scrutiny, all of the coordinators, etc., and yourselves, Chair, and your Vice Chair, we've all been involved in this now, and we've all worked extremely hard for many years. But the time has come that there has to be a change in the way we look at it, and because the good function of government is the good function of scrutiny, and the examination of what the executive is doing. And I think it's a huge executive. It's a huge council, and I think the way the limited amount of scrutiny we have isn't doing the people of Swansea justice. And I think in the fullness of time, we need to look again at how we attract those functions. Thank you.
Okay, I would say that we have been very limited in the last 2 years because of the pandemic and what we have been able to achieve. But one of the things I've tried to do is to, when we're not directly shadowing a cabinet member through a panel, to actually try to pull out important aspects that cabinet members work and bring it to the panel to the programme committee to look at in more depth, and I feel that has worked quite well. Unless someone wants to contradict me, because I think it's worked better than just having a general question session with a cabinet member, because you're able to focus in on a particular subject. And personally, I think that's a good way forward. But you know, we'll see what other people have to think about that. Sue Jones.
Thank you for your chair. I just thought it was a good idea to be co-opted on from some of the scrutiny committees that we were on, and I found that very useful.
Okay, thank you. Terry? You need to unmute, Terry.
If we look into the future, I think it would be interesting if we could have a look at the new Welsh Government housing legislation that is currently being put through and coming to local authority, to many of the local authorities. It's going to affect private sector, public sector, and many, many more. It could be something that we could think of in the future. And as for the second one, I would say one meeting with the police a year it doesn't work. I think we should have 2 a year. And as for yourself, Chair, up to now, I thought you've done a very good job.
Well, thank you, Terry, for that. Thank you. Clive.
Yeah, it's just coming back on Chris's point, really. I think it's an important point, and I think, you know, listen, scrutiny is vitally important to the effective running of the council. I'm aware that things changed in 2012 when we got elected in terms of the way that scrutiny was set up, and there were particular specific committees, Safer Communities Committee, and which operated at that time. And I know that there was, you know, we have moved away from that, and we are in a different place that we've evolved basically over the last 10 years. All I would say really is, listen, at the end of the day, if you're going to say things like we need to have a different style of committee, I think it's incumbent on the scrutiny committee, programme committee, to come up with the ideas and make those proposals as well. So, you know, that would be the first thing I'd look at. I do agree with Terry, though. I think there are some authorities and some bodies that are really in our domain, especially when you see things like the Mayhill riots and all these sorts of things that probably need more scrutiny. And you know, I would say, you know, some of the other chairs we scrutinise executive members, but we don't scrutinise some of the other chairs either, do we? So there's quite a lot of things that could be improved on, in my view, as I say, as I'm leaving. But I do think it's incumbent on the committee as well to come up with the proposals, rather than just saying we need to do things differently and just waiting for the executive to come up with the answers, because, you know, scrutiny should be on the front foot in this respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with that, Clive, and I think we will be putting. Obviously, we start off the new council term with a scrutiny conference, and then maybe we can start addressing that particular structure and the way we do things as part of that scrutiny conference. The one thing I will say, just coming back to Terry's point about Welsh Government legislation, is this tendency towards area committees and combined committees of councils actually makes it harder to scrutinise in many respects, and we have to work out a way, particularly with this new joint committee that's being set up, to try to feed back scrutiny of that into the general council business as well, and not neglect some of the strategic things which those joint committees are going to be looking at, particularly like transport and stuff, because otherwise we will be failing in our duty if we don't do that, and that's something we may want to address as well as part of the scrutiny conference. Okay, Chris?
Yeah, just to answer Clive, to be honest, look, Clive, I don't want to go backwards. Nobody wants to go backwards. But what I'm saying is, and Peter's just alluded to it, and that's these joint committees, and there's other things as well, you know. So it's not a question about looking back and seeing what we had in 2012 or whatever. What I'm concerned about is what happens in the future, given that this council is going to be totally different. And mind you, other councils are going to be totally different. So we need to look at that and how we go about the function in the future. And by the way, I hope you enjoy your retirement.
Yeah. Okay, Mike Weiss.
Yes, one point I would like to raise, Chair, if we can have more people to participate within scrutiny. I think that's paramount. I think that we need, people to have to really get involved and get on board with what areas of the council that we're looking into.
Yeah, I think that's quite important, Mike, because I know that even in the Scrutiny Programme Committee, there are a number of councillors who watch and don't always take part and ask questions, which is their right, of course. But I think we do need people to be more proactive on the committees and asking the questions and not worry that this isn't about a party political thing. You're there to scrutinise, to improve the way the administration runs the council. And I think people have to understand that. And I would hope that that in the training programme which will be put in place for the new council, that we'll be looking at things like active questioning and how to do scrutiny better, and that all the councillors will go along to that and help to improve that process as well. I think that's something which I think hopefully Democratic Services will be looking at, but certainly I think it's something which does need to be taken up and brought into focus. Peter.
Yes, thank you, Chair. A difficult issue that I'd like to raise, and that's the relationship between a scrutiny panel and a policy development committee. And I raised that in my own particular environment policy area.
Yeah.
We had a meeting of the panel, Natural Environment Scrutiny Panel, only this morning, and we had an interesting discussion around this particular issue. Because it's been my experience and my perception that the Natural Environment Scrutiny Panel that I chair or convene has actually been influential in making policy.
Yeah.
And we see no contradiction between the scrutiny function and the policy advice and making function. And then also, there is a policy committee that originally didn't have environment in its terms of reference. And indeed, there was no policy committee that had the environment in its terms of reference. And then rather late in the day, sometime in the last 12 months, I forget exactly when, environment was suddenly added into its hitherto responsibilities for economy and the infrastructure. But without any consultation, without any opportunity, therefore, to consider the responsibility for that particular committee and so on. And it's also been my experience of that committee that it tends not to make policy, but to receive policy. And it receives policy in particular from officers. Whereas the environment panel that I chair, we do the opposite. We make policy. We have made policy. I can give you numerous examples, if necessary, of that, not least the consequences of the inquiry panel 2-3 years ago. So I think that the Scrutiny Programme Committee, in its next guise in the new council, I won't be there either, incidentally, as I'm not seeking re-election. I think the new Scrutiny Programme Committee needs to have a look at the relationship between its function and scrutiny and whatever emerges in terms of policy making after the next election. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Peter. This is something I've been banging on about for many years now, that scrutiny is the first stage of a policy making process. If you're not looking at what we're doing at the moment, then how can you start to make policy to improve or change things? And, scrutiny and policy are interchangeable and cannot be separated out in that way. And I've said this many, many times. And I know you agree with me. So thank you for that contribution. And thank you for your contribution to the scrutiny. I think has been invaluable, and we will miss you from the next council. Paxton.
Hi, Chairman. The CJCs have already now been mentioned, but it's currently obviously in the embryonic stage. We're getting management structures being put in place. They are going to be starting to produce policies which they will expect councils to follow, and I'm not sure as yet. I haven't really seen any scrutiny of the CJCs in terms of the governance, in terms of what has been suggested at this stage. But it's something that we need to be concerned about. I think it's something that we need to be looking forward to, and we need to be pushing, I suppose, Welsh Government on this to make sure that we do have the mechanisms in place to ensure that effective scrutiny of the CJCs can take place as well.
As I understand it, Paxton, they will be setting up a scrutiny panel for that in the same way we do for the education consortium, and that at some stage, presumably the new council will be asked to nominate members to that particular joint scrutiny panel. But then we have to work out how that relates to what we're doing, and how it feeds back to what we're doing. And of course, if a policy is being set in place, for example, on transport by the CJC, it's down to the individual council. Is it down to the individual council to deliver that policy, or is it down to the CJC? And how do our officers on the council then get scrutinised for implementing that joint policy? It's quite a complex issue, and in a way, to be honest, I'd much rather they've done a reorganisation rather than set up these additional structures, which are not necessarily as accountable as they could be. But we'll work with what we've got, and we'll try to make sure that works as best we can.
Yeah, there's certainly going to be interesting developments that we will need to keep a very close eye on and see where they're going, in fact.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Lovely. Anybody else want to make any contributions? No? Okay. Can I thank you for that? It's very helpful. And we'll put, I'm sure Bridge will pull those comments together and for the next scrutiny panel. And I think some of the issues around the structural approach, the structure of scrutiny will need to be addressed in the next council as well, and how we set that up. So I think that's everything we've got to look at today. Can I thank everybody again for their contribution to scrutiny over the last few years, to supporting me as chair. Thank all the officers, in particular the scrutiny officers, but also the council officers themselves for coming along and supporting scrutiny and helping this process. And hopefully I will see some of you on the other end, at the other side of the election. So thank you again, and thank you for all the work you've done and all the work the officers have done on scrutiny as well. So that's I should call the meeting to a close. Thanks very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair.